East Prussia, January 1945. The air burned white with cold. A line of German women nurses, typists, radio operators stumbled along a road half buried in snow. Their grey wool coats were stiff with frost, the straps of their satchels cut into their shoulders. Somewhere behind them, the front had collapsed. The sound of it, the faraway thunder of Soviet artillery, rolled across the frozen plains like the earth itself was breaking apart. They were not soldiers, not really, but war had swallowed them whole. Orders had come to retreat west, yet there was nowhere left to go. Trucks were gone, bridges were gone, hope was gone. Keep walking. One officer barked, his voice breaking as much from fear as frostbite. Boots crunched, someone sobbed, another whispered prayers that froze before reaching the air. By dusk, the snow was pink with the reflection of fire. Villages ahead were burning. The women didn't need binoculars to know what that meant. The Soviets were here. The ground shook under treads miles away, tanks, heavy ones. The women looked at each other, eyes hollow, faces powdered with ash. Their training told them to stay calm, but instinct whispered another command: run. Reports from the Eastern Front had already made their way through the ranks, whispered warnings about what awaited captured Germans. Especially women. They will not take prisoners, one said quietly. Not us. The phrase spread like frostbite through the column. A nurse clutched her Red Cross armband tighter, as if that strip of cloth could save her. But there was no running now. The horizon flashed red, the air filled with the metallic roar of diesel engines. A Soviet tank crested the hill ahead. Black star painted on its armor, snow spraying from its treads. The women froze. One dropped her bag, another fell to her knees. Their officer took a single step forward and raised his hands, slowly, like moving through syrup. He didn't need to speak. The others followed, hands lifted toward the empty sky, fingers shaking, breath steaming in the dying light. For a heartbeat, nothing moved except the tank's gun barrel as it lowered, tracking them. Then the hatch opened with a metallic clang. And that's when the impossible happened. The T-34 tank hissed to a stop, engine rumbling like an animal's growl under steel. Snow melted in dark streaks beneath its treads. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. The German women stood with hands trembling in the air, half praying, half waiting for the end. Then, with a scrape of metal, the hatch lifted. A Soviet gunner climbed out, face wrapped in a black scarf, eyes unreadable under the rim of his helmet. He looked at them, 20 women, pale and silent. Their breath came in short bursts, mist curling around their faces. He swung his rifle forward. A whimper cut through the cold. Somewhere down the line, a woman whispered, "Put your hands up all the way." The words passed from one mouth to another, until even those already surrendering lifted their arms higher, like children in a classroom waiting for forgiveness. But no shot came. The gunner barked a few words in Russian. Another soldier dropped from the tank, then another until a half dozen surrounded them. Their boots pressed into the crusted snow with a rhythm that made every heartbeat count louder. One soldier, maybe 20 years old, kept staring not with anger but confusion. This wasn't the enemy they'd pictured. No rifles, no medals, no fight left to give. The officer among the women tried to speak in broken Russian. The Soviets didn't respond. Instead, one gestured toward a nearby barn, a shell of wood standing crooked against the wind. Inside, he ordered. The word was rough but not cruel. The women hesitated. A rifle jerked upward, and that was enough. They filed toward the barn, boots sliding on ice, each step echoing like a clock counting down. Behind them, the tank's turret rotated away, scanning for real threats. Ahead, the barn door groaned open. Inside smelled of hay and fear. No bullets, no screams, just the thud of the door closing. One woman finally exhaled, her hands shaking as they lowered. "They didn't kill us," she whispered, disbelief wrapped in frost. Outside, the tank's engine died. Silence spread. The only sound left was the rustle of straw under their feet. For the first time in days, they were not running. They were waiting, unsure whether for life or death. And when dawn came, boots began to crunch outside again. Dawn leaked through the cracks in the wooden boards, thin lines of light cutting across pale faces. The air was heavy. Iron, straw, and fear mixed into something that made breathing feel like swallowing nails. 20 German women huddled in silence. The barn had once held livestock. Now it held uncertainty. Somewhere outside, crows picked at the remains of a battlefield that stretched beyond the fields. A door hinge creaked. A Soviet sergeant stepped inside, his greatcoat still dusted with frost. He carried a clipboard and a pistol. For a moment the women tensed. The pistol looked heavier than it was, but he didn't lift it. He just began counting. Odin, WWII. His gloved finger moved from face to face. When he reached 20, he nodded, then scribbled something in his book. No one understood. Why write their names if they were about to die? The officer among them tried to speak again, voice trembling, offering her identification papers. The sergeant glanced at them briefly, then waved her off. He turned to a younger soldier and barked a command. The boy left, then returned minutes later with a metal bucket of water and a loaf of coarse bread. A few gasps escaped. Was this a trick? Poisoned food? Punishment disguised as kindness? One nurse whispered, "Don't touch it." But another woman, exhausted, lips blue, dipped her fingers in the icy water and drank. Nothing happened. The bucket passed hand to hand, each sip more desperate than the last. The sergeant didn't watch them drink. He was too busy writing again, his pen scratching paper like a metronome of disbelief. Soviet archives would later record this moment, part of the vast machinery of war. By 1945, the Red Army had already captured nearly 3 million Axis soldiers. Each one logged, numbered, processed. Even here, even now, bureaucracy kept death waiting its turn. Outside, the artillery grew distant. The front had moved west. The women realized they were no longer on a battlefield, they were behind it. Prisoners, not corpses. The sergeant closed his logbook, tucked it under his arm, and paused at the door. He looked back once, expression unreadable, then stepped into the snow. The door shut. Minutes later, the crunch of boots returned. The door opened again, letting in a breath of frozen air, and the smell of something unexpected. Bread. A Soviet cook stepped inside, shoulders hunched beneath a canvas coat, a dented pot swinging from his hand. Steam rose in ghostly ribbons, curling toward the rafters. The women stirred, every movement cautious, as if a sudden noise might shatter this fragile moment of mercy. He set the pot on the ground and tore a loaf of black bread into uneven pieces. The crust was rock, hard, the inside grey and dense. It wasn't food, it was survival compressed into shape. "Kushat," he muttered. "Eat." The word hung in the air, unrecognizable but heavy with intent. No one moved. The German nurse who'd spoken against drinking the water stared at the pot as if it were bait. The cook frowned, then reached for a wooden spoon. He took a mouthful himself, chewing slowly, eyes fixed on them. The women watched, breath held. When he swallowed and said nothing, the tension broke like ice cracking on a lake. One by one, they reached for the bread. Fingers brushed, pieces passed down the line. No one spoke, not even thanks. The only sound was chewing, soft and rhythmic, echoing off the barn walls. It wasn't kindness they tasted, it was confusion. The enemy feeding them, after what German troops had done to Soviet villages, after what they'd heard on the radio about vengeance and justice. "It didn't fit, they feed us," one whispered after all this. The nurse beside her didn't answer. Her eyes were wet, but not from tears. The cook said something else in Russian, gesturing toward the door. Through the slats, they could see a truck idling in the snow, exhaust curling upward like smoke from a dying fire. The women hesitated. Moving meant trust, staying meant fear. The cook looked back once, raised 2 fingers, dviechosa, 2 hours. Then he left, closing the door behind him. The bread was gone by then. Only crumbs and questions remained. Outside, the truck engine rumbled, steady and patient, as if time itself were waiting for their decision. When the door opened again, guards stood there, motioning them out. Engines coughed in the cold as the Soviet transport trucks lined up beside the barn. Rusted, dented, caked in mud from 100 miles of retreat and advance, they looked as exhausted as their passengers. The German women climbed into the backs of the trucks, one by one, wooden planks biting through their thin coats. A soldier slammed the tailgate shut with a clang that echoed through the frosted fields. The convoy jerked forward. The women swayed, gripping each other for balance. Snow whipped through the open slats, stinging their faces like tiny shards of glass. The nurse with the Red Cross armband clutched her satchel, though she'd already emptied it of supplies. Beside her, a girl no older than 18 pressed her hands together and began whispering a prayer, lips moving without sound. The woman next to her, older, face hard as iron, cut her off with a whisper, "Pray for warmth, not forgiveness." Hours passed in a blur of white and grey. The road stretched endlessly, frozen rivers, burnt trees, villages reduced to chimneys and snowdrifts. If you want love, stopped. Soldiers jumped out, checked tires, yelled orders, then moved again. The women huddled closer, hunger gnawed, fear hummed, but under it all, something new stirred. "I strange calm." They were alive, still here. One woman began to laugh quietly, almost hysterically. "If this is hell," she said in a cracked voice, "at least it moves." No one answered, but a few smiled despite themselves. The older nurse reached into her pocket and found a crust of the black bread, frozen solid. She broke it in half and handed it to the praying girl without a word. Later, a truck ahead skidded on the ice. The column halted. Soldiers jumped down, shouting. One fired a shot into the air, not at anyone, just to make noise against the silence. Then, a faint sound, church bells. Somewhere far away, a village still alive enough to ring them. The women looked up, each lost in her own thoughts. Then the trucks moved again, and as they rounded a bend they saw it, barbed wire glinting in the sunlight. A wooden gate painted with Cyrillic letters. Their destination had arrived. The trucks rolled to a stop before a tall wooden fence crowned with barbed wire that gleamed like frozen lightning. A hand-painted sign hung crooked on the gate, Camp 732. Snow clung to its edges half, covering the Cyrillic letters. The women stared, shivering more from dread than cold. Beyond the gate, smoke curled from tin chimneys and thin figures moved in grey lines, silhouettes against the pale morning light. A guard yanked the tailgate open. Vekhody, out. His voice was flat, mechanical. The women climbed down, boots sinking into slush mixed with ash. One slipped and fell. The soldier didn't help, but neither did he strike her. He simply gestured toward a narrow path leading between watchtowers. The sound of boots crunching was steady, rhythmic, an entire language of obedience learned in seconds. Inside the camp, the stench of disinfectant fought a losing battle against smoke and mud. A Red Army medic stood by the gate with a clipboard, directing new arrivals into lines. One for men, one for women, when a German nurse tried to speak. Offering her medical papers, the medic didn't respond. He just glanced up, muttered Zhenshchini, and pointed her toward a barrack. Inspections followed, quick, rough, perfunctory. Bags searched, coats checked, questions shouted in Russian that no one understood. The women tried to hold their posture, but exhaustion bent them into silence. One guard noticed the Red Cross armband and hesitated, his expression flickering. Then he waved her through. Maybe respect, maybe pity, no one knew. A Soviet officer oversaw the process from a distance, cigarette dangling between his lips. He looked more tired than cruel. His notebook was already half full of names and numbers. Reports would later reveal that by this stage of the war, the Soviet Union was holding nearly 4 million Axis prisoners. Camps like this one dotted the landscape from Poland to Siberia, each a temporary purgatory for the defeated. The line moved again, the nurse glanced toward the watchtower, a soldier stared back. Young, expression blank, rifle resting against the railing. Their eyes met for half a second before she was shoved forward. The barracks loomed ahead. Low, wooden, smoke curling from cracked chimneys. The door creaked open, and for the first time warmth waited inside. The barrack door shut behind them with a dull thud that echoed like a verdict. Inside, dim light flickered from a single oil lamp swinging from a rafter. The room smelled of smoke, damp wood, and bodies trying to stay human in the cold. Straw mats lined the floor, stacked too high along the walls. Beds without comfort, warmth without rest. A guard entered, stomping snow off his boots. He unrolled a scroll of paper and began reading the camp's rules in Russian. None of the women understood a word, but the gestures were clear enough. Wake before sunrise, line up for roll call. Work assignment by dawn, no talking after lights out, no hiding, no escape. The man's voice was flat, rehearsed, like someone reading a prayer that had lost its God. When he finished, a younger soldier translated roughly into broken German, "You work, you eat, you don't know eat." A thin smile ghosted his face, not mocking, just tired. He motioned toward a wooden board nailed to the wall where labor lists were posted. The women leaned in. Most were assigned to kitchen duty, cleaning, sewing, or sanitation, but one line stood out. Clerical aid, Section 3, the name beside it, Anna Weiss, stenographer. Anna blinked. Her hands still shook from cold, but she understood. They wanted her to type, to write for them. The irony felt like a trap, yet that night she was led to a small office near the camp's edge halfkel, apsed roof, typewriter salvaged from some ruined government building. A Russian clerk sat beside her, guiding her to copy reports. "We are rebuilding," he said quietly in accented German. Even this. Each keystroke echoed in the silence. The rhythm was mechanical, numbing, but alive. Through the window, she could see the watchtower light sweeping the snow, each rotation marking time in a world where time no longer mattered. By week's end, the routine took hold: work, eat, sleep. The women stopped crying at night, stopped expecting gunfire. One whispered, "Maybe they need us." Another replied, "Then we live for now." That night, as frost crept along the window glass, Anna hid a small secret, a faded photograph tucked inside her boot. It would soon be found. Snow drifted in through the cracks of the barrack roof, settling softly on the straw. The morning whistle had already blown, but Anna lingered for a moment, crouched by her bunk. From inside her boot, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, she pulled out a photograph, the only thing she still owned. Faded corners, creased center, faces smiling from another lifetime, her brother in uniform. She brushed away a fleck of ash and tucked it back, heart racing at every creak outside. Guards were unpredictable. Some ignored small things, others didn't. Today, her luck ran out. During inspection, a soldier's boot knocked her satchel open. Papers spilled. The photograph slid out, landing face up in the snow. The guard bent down and picked it up. His gloved thumb brushed the image. A young German man stared back from that tiny square of frozen time. Clean, shaven, confident, alive. The guard said nothing, just stared. Anna's stomach twisted. She stepped forward instinctively, whispering, "My brother." The soldier's eyes flicked toward her. For a second, everything else vanished: the noise, the cold, the orders shouted down the yard. He looked at the photo again, then at her, his face unreadable. Behind him, another guard barked something sharp in Russian. The soldier hesitated, torn between command and conscience. Then, quietly, he slipped the photograph back into Anna's hand and turned away. No punishment, no words. She didn't thank him, couldn't, her throat locked. But that small moment shifted something. That night, she lay awake, staring at the rafters. Around her, the women breathed in rhythm, one wheezing softly, another muttering in dreams. Anna held the photo close, tracing the edges until her fingers went numb. She wondered if her brother had ever stood on the same frozen ground. If maybe his ghost passed through this camp, unseen. Outside, the snow fell thicker, muffling every sound. Somewhere near the gate, a Soviet sentry lit a cigarette, its glow flickering through the slats like a heartbeat in the dark. The man who'd returned her photograph might have been that same silhouette. Mercy had a face tonight, and in that fragile quiet, Trust something she thought war had erased began to flicker back to life. Tomorrow, she'd see it again in the smallest act imaginable. Spring crept in like a rumor, slow, muddy, uncertain. The snow melted into grey puddles that reflected the barbed wire and the watchtower's shadow. The camp smelled of damp earth and smoke now instead of ice. One morning, the guards passed down paper. Thin, yellow, stamped with red ink, for letters, said a Russian clerk in broken German. Home, 1 page. The women stared as if he'd handed them passports to another world. Home, was it even still there? Anna's hands trembled as she took the sheet. She hadn't seen a pen in months. Ink felt like memory itself, something too human for this place. Still, she began to write. "Dear Mother, I am alive." The words bled through the paper, small rivers of hope in blue ink. Around her, the barrack filled with the soft scratch of pens. Some wrote to parents, some to husbands they no longer knew were dead. Others simply wrote names, proof they'd once existed somewhere beyond these fences. By dusk, the guards collected the letters, stacked them neatly, tied with string, carried them toward the administration hut. The women watched them go as if watching their own hearts disappear into that wooden door. Days passed, weeks, no replies came. Then one afternoon, Anna was called to the clerk's office. The same man who'd given them paper. He closed the door, looked around nervously, and whispered, "Some letters maybe I send." He pulled a few folded pages from under his coat. "Secret, you understand?" She did. She nodded, tears threatening but refusing to fall. She recognized her handwriting among them, faint scent of candle wax still clinging to the page. "Why?" she asked softly. The clerk shrugged. "My sister German bomb, dead. Still, letters matter." He handed her one back, one he couldn't risk sending but wanted her to keep. "Hope," he said simply. Then he tucked the rest inside his jacket and slipped into the dusk. That night, Anna couldn't sleep. She stared at her own letter, folded neatly in her lap. Maybe her mother would never read it. Maybe that wasn't the point. The act of writing had already done what survival alone couldn't. It reminded her she was still a person. Outside, the mud rippled under the first drops of spring rain, and with it came new orders work detail. By April, the ground had thawed into a battlefield of mud. Boots sank ankle, deep with every step. The air carried the heavy smell of wet iron and coal smoke. The women were lined up at dawn, handed shovels, and marched beyond the camp's outer fence. Barbed wire gave way to railroad tracks twisted and broken from months of shelling. "You fix," said the guard in halting German, pointing at the rails. For the first time since capture, the world beyond the fence opened before them, wide, wounded, and strangely silent. Anna gripped the shovel, palms raw within minutes. Around her, women swung hammers, lifted sleepers, dragged iron. The Soviets watched, pacing, rifles slung loosely over shoulders. No shouting now, just the rhythmic clang of metal on metal. The sound echoed across the valley like a broken heartbeat. A Russian worker tripped near a pile of stones. The impact sent his pickaxe skidding toward Anna's boots. She froze, then bent to return it. He was bleeding, deep cut across his forearm. A guard barked for him to get up, but the man couldn't. Without thinking, Anna tore a strip from her undershirt and wrapped the wound. The guard started forward, ready to stop her, then hesitated. The bleeding slowed. The Russian exhaled, muttered something that might have been Spasibo. "Thank you." Word spread through the work crew, a German nurse helping a Russian worker. It was absurd, almost comic, yet no one laughed. That afternoon, a Soviet officer appeared, taking notes, his expression unreadable. Later, he approached Anna quietly. "You were nurse?" She nodded. "Good." He said, "We remember." By evening, the women were covered in mud, arms shaking from fatigue, but something inside felt lighter. They had done more than survive, they'd built something, however small. The train tracks now connected again, a steel scar stretching into the horizon. As they trudged back toward the camp, one woman whispered, "Enemy hands rebuilt their enemy's country." Another replied softly, "Maybe that's how wars actually end." At the gate, the same officer who'd spoken to Anna stopped her. "Tomorrow," he said, "you work hospital." His tone wasn't harsh. "Just final," she nodded, heart pounding. Tomorrow would change everything. The next morning began with unusual tension, the kind that made every whisper feel dangerous. Guards scrubbed their uniforms. Officers polished boots. Even the flag on the watchtower hung straight for once. Rumor spread like smoke. Moscow inspectors were coming. The women were ordered to stand straighter, work faster, look presentable. For prisoners, that meant alive and quiet. By midday, the convoy arrived, 3 jeeps crawling through the mud, red stars gleaming on their hoods. Out stepped officers with notebooks and hard eyes. They inspected the fences, barracks, kitchens, even the infirmary. Anna stood in the doorway of that small, half-lit room, her white cloth apron still damp from cleaning. The officer in charge stopped, scanning her face with detached curiosity. "Medical staff?" he asked in Russian. The camp commander nodded. The inspectors began firing questions: how many treated, how many died, what supplies remained. The Soviet medic translating looked uneasy, the numbers weren't flattering. Then, as if by instinct or design, the commander pointed at Anna. "Demonstrate," he ordered. A soldier was brought in from outside, a young man with a jagged wound on his leg from an accident at the repair site. Blood seeped through the bandage, pooling on the floorboards. Without waiting for permission, Anna knelt beside him, hands already steadying the leg. She didn't think training took over. She cut away the cloth, cleaned the wound with iodine, wrapped it tight. The soldier winced but didn't pull away. The room went silent except for her breathing and the rustle of fabric. When it was done, one of the inspectors, a grey-haired colonel, stepped forward. He studied her work, then nodded slightly once. No words, just a gesture, small but seismic. That night, the camp records were updated. 12 German women were reassigned to hospital division. Anna's name led the list. Soviet archives later recorded that roughly 12,000 German female POW served in medical or support roles within reconstruction camps by 1946. For some, it meant survival, for others, a slow redemption they hadn't asked for. As Anna returned to her barrack, she glanced back at the infirmary window. The soldier she'd treated lay sleeping inside, breathing evenly. Tomorrow, she'd follow him east to a new posting in Minsk. Minsk, summer 1945. The train screeched to a halt beside what had once been a grand station, now a skeleton of brick and ash. Anna stepped down with a dozen other German nurses, each carrying a tin kit and a silence that felt heavier than luggage. The city smelled of smoke, disinfectant, and rain. Their destination loomed ahead. A bomb, Dout Hospital, windows shattered, roof patched with canvas and sheet metal. Locals called it Bolnitsa Prizrak, the Hospital of Ghosts. Inside, the corridors were lined with stretchers. Soviet soldiers lay everywhere, bandaged, burned, missing limbs. The nurses hesitated at first. These were the men they'd been taught to hate, the faces behind the destruction of their homeland. Yet when the first patient groaned in pain, instincts buried under months of fear reawakened. Anna knelt beside him, adjusting a splint, her hands trembling only for a moment. Days blurred together. Work began before sunrise and ended when exhaustion forced their bodies still. The Red Army doctors, skeptical at first, soon realized the women were skilled. They stitched, cleaned, carried, boiled water until their fingers blistered. War had stripped away uniforms, leaving only need. One night, while washing blood from a set of instruments, Anna overheard a Soviet medic whisper, "We lost 2 million wounded in the final months. Too many to hate them all." His words hung in the air like smoke. The numbers were staggering. Reports estimated more than 2 million Soviet casualties between January and May 1945. Each bed here represented a fragment of that unimaginable cost. The patients noticed too. Some stared with suspicion, others with quiet gratitude. A few even tried broken German, offering shy thanks. One soldier, his leg gone below the knee, watched Anna for days before speaking. His voice was rough but calm. "You patch me up," he said softly, "and I once aimed rifle at you." Anna didn't look up. "Then we're both lucky," she answered. He smiled faintly, then fell asleep. In that moment, the boundaries blurred enemy and healer, guilt and grace, all dissolving under the same sterile light. She cleaned her tools, hung them to dry, and looked out through the canvas roof at a moon veiled by smoke. Somewhere in the ward, that same soldier whispered her name. Rain lashed against the cracked windows of the Minsk hospital, drumming a rhythm that blurred into the sound of labored breathing and distant coughing. The nights here never felt quiet, only slower. Anna moved between cots, replacing bandages, whispering reassurances that crossed languages through tone alone. On the far side of the ward lay the soldier who had spoken to her before. His name was Alexei. The stump of his left leg was clean now, healing well, but something else kept him awake. That night, when most of the ward had drifted into exhausted sleep, he spoke again. "Smolensk," he said suddenly, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Anna paused mid-step. "What?" He turned his head toward her. "My regiment fought there, 1943, you from there." The word Smolensk struck like a bullet she didn't see coming. Her brother's last letter had been from that very front, dated August 1943. He never returned. Anna felt her throat tighten. She walked closer, her voice low, almost a whisper. "My brother died there." Alexei's gaze hardened, then softened, the realization blooming slowly in his eyes. "Maybe," he began, then stopped. His hand trembled. "I was there. We killed many Germans." The sentence hung between them, brutal in its simplicity. Anna's heartbeat thundered in her ears. The air seemed to shrink around them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Just the rain, relentless and cold, filling the silence with truth too heavy for words. Then he said quietly, "If I killed him, you saved me." She stared at him, this man who could be the reason her brother never came home. And yet, lying there, he was fragile, scared, human. She adjusted his blanket, voice steady but hollow. "Then maybe we both lost something that night." Later, when the lights dimmed and the ward fell into uneasy sleep, she sat beside his bed. His breathing evened out. In the half-light, she caught her reflection in a cracked mirror across the wall, her face beside his, ghostly and unfamiliar. It struck her they were both remnants of the same storm, surviving its wake in opposite uniforms. Outside, rumors had started to spread. Whispers of amnesty, of prisoners being sent home. Hope, fragile as paper, drifted through the wards. Anna didn't dare believe it yet. By August 1946, the hospital had gone quiet. The wounded were leaving, some home, some to new units, others to graves marked only by wooden stakes and initials. Then came the order, repatriation of selected German personnel. The word ran through the halls like wildfire. For the first time in years, home was no longer just a memory, it was a possibility. At dawn, the women gathered in the courtyard under a grey, wet sky. Soviet officers stood beside a Red Cross truck, reading names from a list. Each name felt like a heartbeat, each silence between them a stopped one. "Weiss, Anna," the officer called, her breath caught. She stepped forward, clutching the small parcel that held her brother's photograph and her mother's letter, never sent but carried through every mile of captivity. A guard checked her tag, stamped it, then nodded toward a line of train cars waiting beyond the fence. The train was painted military green, rust bleeding through the color. Steam hissed from beneath the wheels like the sigh of the earth itself. One by one, the women climbed aboard. Some smiled through tears, others looked terrified, unable to believe freedom wasn't another trick. Anna found a seat near the window, knees pressed to her chest. Outside, Alexei, the soldier she'd once feared and then saved, stood with crutches, watching the departure. He lifted a hand in silent farewell. She returned the gesture, lips trembling but eyes steady. Not everyone was so lucky. Half the names on the list had gone unread. Those women stood behind the wire, watching the train with faces carved from disbelief. "Only 30%, one Soviet clerk muttered, shaking his head. Others wait longer. Records would later confirm it. Barely 1 in 3 German female POWs were repatriated by 1948. The whistle blew, the guards stepped back. As the train lurched forward, the camp receded, its fences shrinking, its towers fading into the haze. Freedom didn't feel light. It pressed against the chest like a weight you couldn't drop. Anna kept her eyes on the horizon until even the smoke from Camp 732 disappeared. For the first time since 1945, she exhaled without fear, and somewhere deep inside her coat the photograph waited to be opened again. Autumn 1946. The war was over, but silence still ruled the ruins of Germany. Anna stepped off the train into a city she barely recognized. Her hometown flattened into rows of broken chimneys and hollow-eyed houses. The air carried that strange post, or smell of dust, diesel, and distance. She walked past a church missing its steeple through streets where nothing remembered her name. Weeks later, a parcel arrived at the makeshift address she'd given the Red Cross. Brown paper, tied with fraying string. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was her photograph, the one she'd carried, lost, then found again. This time it was clean, pressed between 2 sheets of Soviet paper. No note, no sender, just the picture. Her brother smiling in a world that no longer existed. She sat by the window, rain streaking the glass, and stared at that familiar face. Around her, Germany was rebuilding, brick by brick, ration by ration. But the war still echoed in every movement, every silence. She thought of the barn, the bread, the train, the hospital, and the faces of those who had been both captor and savior. They didn't kill us. She whispered to the empty room, they changed us. For months afterward, she worked as a nurse in a refugee clinic, helping civilians who'd lost everything. When people asked where she'd learned such patience, she only smiled. There were some lessons, she knew, that could only be learned in captivity. The official records would later mention her only once. Returned prisoner, female, skilled nurse, good conduct. A single line in a sea of statistics. Of the 100,000 German women captured on the Eastern Front, fewer than 10,000 would ever leave written testimonies. Most remained silent, their stories buried beneath politics and shame. But Anna's silence was not emptiness, it was reverence. She kept that photograph beside her bed until her final days, edges worn soft from touch. Sometimes she'd trace her brother's face with a fingertip and see, behind him, the ghost of a Russian soldier who had given her back her humanity without a word. And in that quiet, she understood the real ending of war, not victory, not surrender, just mercy.